One prayer, and the sun and the moon would stop moving. He was a simple leader of Israel, chosen by God to lead his people to Canaan. He faced enemies on his way, warlords, ruthless killers, and 5 kings. The kings were scared of Joshua and escaped him. As they fled, giant stones of ice fell from heaven, until he looked up at heaven and everything stopped. The land of Canaan was facing a great danger. This was the land God had promised to the people of Israel. A nation of people who had once been slaves in Egypt crossed over the Jordan River and entered this land. Their leader's name was Joshua, son of Nun. He had once fought beside Moses, and when Moses died, the Lord chose Joshua to lead the people into this land. The first city in their way was Jericho, a large city surrounded by a thick wall, so thick that the people inside believed nothing could ever break through it. Joshua sent his priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant around the city walls, marching once around it every day for 6 days, with the army following quietly behind them. On the 7th day, they marched around the city 7 times, and then the priests lifted their trumpets to their mouths and blew a long, loud blast. Joshua raised his hand and gave the command, and every soldier shouted with all the strength in his lungs. The walls of Jericho fell down flat, and the city was taken. After this, the city of Ai fell as well, though it did not fall easily, and only after Joshua led his men in a clever ambush, drawing the soldiers of Ai out of their gates and then turning his hidden men against them from behind. The victories had only just begun. Soon Joshua would face not 1 king, but 5 at once. The kings of Canaan heard about these 2 cities falling, and they grew afraid, because they did not know how to stop Joshua and this nation from taking their land. There was a city named Gibeon, a large and important city belonging to a people called the Hivites. The men of Gibeon decided they did not want to fight against Joshua. Instead, they made a plan. They loaded old, cracked wineskins onto the backs of their donkeys, and they wrapped worn-out, patched sacks around the saddles. They put on sandals that were old and falling apart, and they wore clothes that had grown dry and moldy, as if from a very long journey. Carrying dry, crumbled bread, they walked many miles down out of the hill country until they reached the camp of the Israelites at Gilgal. There, they bowed low before Joshua and the leaders of Israel, lifting up their cracked wineskins, and they said they had come from a country very far away, asking Joshua to make a covenant of peace with them. Joshua believed them and made the promise, swearing before the Lord that Israel would let them live. That single promise would soon pull Israel into one of the greatest battles in its history. 3 days later, after the promise had already been sworn, men brought word to Joshua that these were no foreign travelers at all, but the people of Gibeon, who lived only a short distance away, deep within the very land Israel had come to take. But the promise had already been made, so Joshua did not break it, and Gibeon was kept safe, though he made them servants who would cut wood and carry water for the rest of their days. When the other kings of Canaan heard that Gibeon had made peace with Israel instead of fighting, they became very angry, because Gibeon was a strong city, and its choice to join Israel made all of them weaker in the eyes of their enemies. 5 kings decided to join their armies together and march as one against Gibeon to punish it. There was Adoni-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, a city set high upon the hills. There was Hoham, the king of Hebron. There was Piram, the king of Jarmuth, Japhia, the king of Lachish, and Debir, the king of Eglon, each one bringing his own soldiers, his own chariots, and his own captains. Together, their combined armies set out from their cities and marched toward Gibeon to surround its walls and tear it down completely. The men of Gibeon stood upon their walls and watched the dust rise on the horizon long before the armies arrived. They saw spear tips flashing in the sunlight as 5 armies came pouring over the distant hills. Knowing they could never survive such an attack on their own, they quickly sent runners out through a narrow path before the enemy could fully surround the city. These runners ran without resting, their sandals slapping hard against the dry ground, racing across hills and through narrow valleys, until at last, exhausted and gasping, they reached the camp of Gilgal, where Joshua and the Israelites were staying. They fell down before Joshua, their chests heaving, and cried out, "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly and save us, for all the kings of the hill country have joined together against us." That night, while Joshua sat thinking of the long climb ahead, the Lord spoke to him and told him not to be afraid, promising that not one of the 5 kings would be able to stand. It even faded from the sky. Joshua woke his men in the darkness. They strapped on their sandals, fastened their belts, picked up their swords and shields, and gathered their spears. And before the sun had even begun to rise, Joshua led his whole army out from the camp at Gilgal, setting their faces toward Gibeon. The road to Gibeon climbed steadily upward through hard, rocky hills, a narrow path winding between steep cliffs, the kind of road that would normally take any traveler a long, slow climb under the safety of daylight. But Joshua did not let his men stop to rest even once. He pushed them forward through the entire night, up the steep and twisting path in total darkness. The only sound, the scraping of sandals against loose stone, and the heavy breathing of tired men. Their legs ached, and their feet were cut and bruised by sharp rocks hidden in the dark. But they kept climbing, because they trusted Joshua, and Joshua trusted the promise the Lord had spoken to him. By the time the first gray light of morning touched the hilltops, they had finished the entire climb, and there below them, spread out across the valley, was Gibeon, surrounded on every side by the tents, the fires, and the soldiers of the 5 kings. The enemy soldiers, still waking from sleep, never expected an attack so soon after such an impossible night march. Joshua's army poured down from the hills and struck before the enemy could even gather into their battle lines. The soldiers of the 5 kings dropped their spears, turned, and ran in panic. Seeing their armies breaking apart all around them, the 5 kings climbed onto their chariots and fled down the steep road that led toward Beth Horon, hoping to escape into the safety of the lowlands below. As the soldiers ran down that winding road, the sky above them grew dark and heavy, and large stones of ice came crashing down out of the clouds onto the running men. These hailstones struck down more of the enemy soldiers along the road to Beth Horon than the swords of Israel had struck down in the entire battle. Joshua knew that if the sun set before the battle finished, the surviving soldiers would slip away into the darkness and gather their strength again. He needed more daylight, more hours to finish what God had already promised him. So Joshua lifted his eyes toward the sky, in front of all the men of Israel watching him, and he spoke aloud, saying, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon, stop over the valley of Ajalon." And the sun stood still in the middle of the sky, and the moon stayed in its place, refusing to move, until the nation finished defeating its enemies. This is written in the book of Joshua, chapter 10. The 5 kings, watching their soldiers fall all around them beneath the unending daylight, abandoned their chariots and ran on foot up into the rocky hills near a town called Madiha. There, hidden among the rocks, they found a deep cave carved into the hillside, and one after another, they crawled inside and pressed themselves into the darkness, hoping the shadows would keep them hidden until the fighting outside had ended. But word soon reached Joshua of exact exactly where the 5 kings were hiding. Joshua gave the command, and his men rolled enormous stones across the mouth of the cave, sealing the kings inside the darkness, and he placed guards at the entrance so that none of them could slip away while the rest of the army went out to finish striking down the soldiers still scattered across the fields. And through it all, the sun still had not set. When the long fighting had finally ended and the army returned to the camp at Madiha, Joshua gave the order to roll the stones away from the cave. The 5 kings were pulled out one by one and brought before Joshua, made to stand before him in the open air. Joshua called all the commanders of Israel's army to come forward, and he told them to step forward and place their feet upon the necks of the 5 defeated kings, a sign to everyone watching that these once powerful rulers had been completely crushed. After this, Joshua struck the 5 kings down and had their bodies hung on 5 separate trees until the evening. When the evening light finally began to fade, the bodies were taken down from the trees and thrown into the very cave where they had once hidden. And great stones were rolled once more over the entrance, sealing it shut, the same stones still resting there to this very day. After this battle, Joshua did not rest. He gathered his soldiers, strapped on his armor once more, and led them onward to the city of Libnah. They walked down through dry, dusty valleys and climbed over rough hills until the city came into view, and Joshua attacked it and left no one alive inside, just as he had done at Madiha. From Libnah, Joshua turned his army toward Lachish, a strong city that had belonged to one of the 5 fallen kings. His men marched for the better part of a day beneath the hot, beating sun until the high walls of Lachish rose up before them in the distance. Horam, the king of Gezer, hearing that Lachish was under attack, gathered his own soldiers and came rushing to defend it. But Joshua's army struck down Horam and all his soldiers as well. On the second day, the city of Lachish fell, struck down exactly as Libnah had been before it. From there, Joshua led his army across open fields and along dusty roads toward Eglon. When they arrived, they camped against the city and attacked it that very same day, leaving no one alive inside. Then, Joshua turned his tired but unstoppable army up into the hill country, climbing steep and winding roads toward the ancient city of Hebron. They attacked Hebron and all the smaller towns surrounding it, leaving no one alive, just as they had done at Eglon.